that whether it needs to be signed from our last meeting. You weren't there, Jess, so I don't know if you want to sign it or not, but you're welcome to. Okay. I think where we left off is we were going to have a little bit of discussion about pre-existing non-conforming, and then maybe move to the table of use. Is my memory jive with other folks' memories? Is that how you remember, Kristen?
Yeah, I think so. We kind of jumped all over, so it's hard to remember exactly what we covered and what we didn't, but I know I definitely wanted to spend time. I think we looked at the table a little bit, but I definitely want to spend time on the whole idea of non-conforming.
Yeah, let's do that, because I think that's complicated. We're back recording, right, Tara?
Yes.
Okay.
And you're live on YouTube.
Yeah. So do you, hopefully I have the right ordinance this time. Do you want to lead that discussion a little? I know you also had some concerns with our ordinance too, if I recall.
Yeah, I mean, more specifically, I guess, about the definitions of non-conforming structure, or maybe that there wasn't a definition at all.
Well, we're on page 3, section 3, I believe, correct? That's where non-conformance is addressed.
Right, in the land use ordinance.
Yes. Yeah, I haven't even got to the shoreline yet. I'm still poking through the land use. Hopefully the shoreline will go quicker because a lot of it mirrors this, but.
Right, so I think, Dan, for your purposes, the one thing that's kind of glaringly missing from this land use ordinance is definitions of non-conforming structure, non-conforming lot, non-conforming use. Even though they're not defined, what I'd suggest is to refer, if you ever need to the definitions that are in the shoreline zoning ordinance, because the idea is that they kind of comport between the two. And those shoreline zoning definitions are the common ones we turn to understand these ideas. So let's just my biggest thing that I harp on with non-conforming structures, uses, and lots is that they are each their own animal. And people tend to lump them together sometimes and call it a non-conforming use. So let's say you have a building that's too big for the lot, or it's too close to the setback. A lot of people, again, will say that's a non-conforming use. Well, it's not a non-conforming use. It's a non-conforming structure. So let's give a scenario here of, let's say it's a manufacturing business that's in a structure that is 50 feet from the shoreline. And it's on a lot that happens to be 0.2 acres. Okay, so that probably has 3 different nonconformities depending on which zone you're in. So in a resource protection zone, let's say, and under shoreline zoning, you wouldn't be able to have that kind of a manufacturing use there today. So if that manufacturing use predated the ordinance, then that's a non-conforming use. It's the use of the building. And when I think of the use, I look at that table of uses and think, what is that use today? Where does it fall on the table? And what was the use of that building or property when the ordinance was adopted? And where does it fall on the table? And if it falls under the same line, then it would be a non-conforming use, meaning it's grandfathered because it was conducted on the property before the ordinance was passed. Now you may have some variations. Let's say it was this is weird, I keep the camera keeps focusing on me talking, so I can't see anybody else. It was a retail use back in 1974, and all through till the 90s. And let's say they were selling, pottery. But then today they happen to be selling t-shirts and souvenirs. Well, the type of use may have changed in that sense, but in terms of where it falls on the table of uses, it hasn't changed during that time. So the use has stayed the same. It's always been a retail use and is non-conforming. Okay, so that's use. It is really just about what is the use of the building or the property, what kind of activities are going on there. Non-conforming structure. So in my example, the structure is too big for the lot. It has too much lot coverage. And so that means that the structure is non-conforming. So a non-conforming structure is one that's too big for the lot. Now, not that the lot itself is too small, but the structure has too much lot coverage. Or it falls within any of the setbacks that are under the ordinance. So I don't recall that there are sideline setbacks, but too close to the front line or too close to the water principally is where that comes in. So again, the building itself or the structure, because like we covered the last time, not all structures are buildings, but pretty much anything that's put in the ground or on the ground can be a structure. So now we're looking at the physical, size and location of the structure. If it was in place before the ordinance was adopted or before the part of the ordinance was adopted that now makes it illegal, now it's grandfathered and legally non-conforming. And then in my example, it was a lot that was 0.2 acres. So let's presume that that is a lot size that's not allowed in that district. So the lot itself is non-conforming. So each of these conditions you wouldn't be able to create today because they'd be in violation of the ordinance, but because they existed prior to the piece of the ordinance that makes them illegal, they are now, non-conforming. And so for each of those, if you run into that scenario, if you're in shoreland zoning, of course, you look at the shoreland zoning ordinance first. If you're not in shoreland, you look at the regular land use ordinance first, and it's going to tell you the parameters around which that structure, use, or lot are allowed to continue going forward. So there are specific provisions about expansion of a non-conforming use. In our case, and that was the issue in Wilson, you can't expand beyond the lot on which the non-conforming use has existed. And then on non-conforming lots, you can't make them smaller. You can build on them within certain restrictions. And then non-conforming structures is the one that really you're going to be dealing with most. And that's, they can be maintained. They can often be replaced, but in the shoreland zoning context, at least, they have to be moved back beyond the shoreland setback or made as conforming as possible. So the ordinance has all these triggers, right? Where, in order to protect your property rights, we're grandfathering your property. But under this particular scenario, it's reasonable to require you to bring it into conformance as much as possible. So I'll give the example of like in shoreland zoning, if you're lifting a building that's non-conforming to put a new foundation under it, the ordinance requires you to pull it back to the greatest practical extent. Because, hey, you're lifting it anyway, you're doing all of this work. We're going to take that opportunity to now fix or at least improve the nonconformity. So I mean, really general overview, but this is a really difficult issue, and one where at least as you're getting your feet wet and this stuff, always run by MMA or myself to make sure we're applying the right standards the right way.
I just had a phone call with that today, somebody who was looking to lift one. And, if you're saying that, hey, while we have that opportunity, let's move it, back to the conforming, where we can conform it.
Exactly. Yep.
Or as close as you can.
Right,
If you can't get it back to 75 feet, but you can say it's 50, and you could get back to 65, but not 75, you're saying that's still required.
required.
It is still required, yep, to the greatest practical extent, as much as you can do. In shoreland zoning, there's a, really helpful set of standards and definitions that help you determine what's greatest practical extent. And it's practicality, not cost. It might be astoundingly expensive to have to move a structure, and that's not taken into account. But what is taken into account are physical things like power lines, ledge, setbacks from septic systems and wells, that sort of thing. So there are a lot of factors to take into account. In shoreland context, it's the planning board that's applying those standards. But you're probably going to be the one talking to the people about the property when they first come in, buying the property and asking what the renovation potential is. So, you're always the first line of giving the interpretation of the ordinance to give people some guidance. As we talked about, this stuff is extremely thorny, and you can't guarantee where the planning board is going to go when it gets into this like greatest practical extent analysis. So you don't want to tell them that, yes, if you put it here, it's going to be okay. What you'd want to tell them is, just so you understand, if your intent is to rebuild this structure and you're going to be, putting more than 50% of the value into it, that's a trigger that you have to meet the standards. If you're going to be putting a new foundation under it, that's a trigger that you need to meet the standards. And it's going to be the planning board probably that's going to apply them, but this is what you need to know. You're not going to tell them again whether they can or can't meet it. You're just going to give them the heads up that that's what the analysis is going to be made.
So one question or concept I'd like to kick around a little bit is kind of get out of the shoreline zone now, but we have a lot of non-conforming uses around town. And I'm not talking about the shoreline zone now here. And I don't think we've done a very good job of enforcing this at all, but my understanding is if you have a non-conforming use, you can't expand that use. And that gets really tricky in my mind, because what is an expansion of a use? I mean, if you, and I'll give you a subjective, try to be as subjective as possible. If you're selling used automobiles on the lot, and you only typically sold, 5 or 6 a year, but all of a sudden you now want to sell, you had 5 or 6 on the lot, let's say, for a number of years, and all of a sudden you've gone to 20. Is that an expansion of use? And I think that gets really subjective.
Well, it could, except for that your ordinance has a super bright line test, which is a terrible test. And that is, as long as it stays within the boundaries of the lot that it's on, it's okay. So
That's why, and where is that in particular?
it is section 3F.
It's F. Section 3F. A non-conforming use, including outdoor use of land, shall not be extended or expanded in area or function beyond the boundaries of land in the same ownership on the date of adoption of the land.
Okay, so and that's kind of unusual, correct?
It is, absolutely.
But it also makes it much easier to administer.
Also true, but it certainly doesn't serve the purposes, I think, of or land use ordinances and the idea that you reduce nonconformities over time. Being able to expand within the boundaries of a lot, like you said, it could be they sold 4 cars at a time before, and now the entire lot is, Wiscasset Ford or whatever. It's not great. So, I mean, I think in general too, there's just so much distinction between the nonconformity piece of this ordinance and shoreland zoning, and the way it's interpreted, it lends to a lot of confusion. So it would make sense to kind of compare the two and see what you can transfer over here, since that's been a lot of the goal, is to make these two similar.
So you're saying in the shoreline zone, this would not apply? You would
Now,
need-
let me pull up the shoreland zoning.
If you're following up on the automobile example, if it was in the shoreline zone, you'd be limited to the 5 or 6 you can traditionally sell.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily, okay.
Expansions of non-conforming uses are prohibited, except the non-conforming residential uses may, after obtaining a permit from the plan, be expanded within existing residential structures or within expansion of such structures. So,
That's just residential.
right,
That's not the example of the car law.
I mean, I think that it would be fair to say it can be expanded within an existing structure. But when you start to say that you can expand it within the entire lot and lot within the same ownership, which could extend beyond what anybody ever assumed was, the lot on which that use is conducted, that just gets to the point where it could be a little crazy. A lot of towns in their general land use ordinance will say, they can be expanded no more than 30% in scope, hours of operation, or building or land area.
The trouble with that is tracking that over time.
It is hard.
25 years from now, who remembers that? Can we talk a little bit about lots for a second? Let's assume we have a 2-acre lot minimum. Someone has 3.9 acres, they've never subdivided it. So they are eligible, because they haven't subdivided that lot within the last 5 years. Under the subdivision rules, they're eligible to divide that lot, correct?
Correct.
But they can't divide that lot because they would have to create one non-conforming lot that's less than 2 acres under the example that I gave. Now, I know that new law may change some of that, but so that's and when you create a second unit on a lot that doesn't have the 4 acres in my example, doesn't that immediately create a non-conforming lot because of the construction of that second structure?
I don't know that we have a minimum lot size per dwelling unit.
I think we do. We have we have some exceptions for like so-called mother-in-law. I don't know why it's mother-in-law as opposed to father-in-law, but and then of course you got this whole new law and how that impacts this as well. But
yeah, our minimum lot size per dwelling is 1 acre everywhere except for in the village extension, which is a half acre.
yeah, and I just use it too as an example. Yeah,
But
same principle.
But the CEO may issue a permit for a second dwelling unit, such as a mother-in-law area, if existing constraints in the main statutes can be met, such as 20,000 square feet per dwelling unit and a successful septic system reviewed by the LPI.
Is that in every zone?
Yes.
Okay.
So
Where's that, Jeff?
that's table C dimensions on page 12. Right after the table reduces.
But you could not create a separate lot to, say, build a repair shop, even if it was allowed.
Yeah, absolutely. And keep away from calling, you said, I think, John, that if you created that second lot, it would be non-conforming. It wouldn't be non-conforming, it would be illegal because it's newly created.
Okay, and that's an important. So non-conforming means it had to have existed on the day of the adoption of the ordinance or the amendment that prohibited it.
Correct.
Or
Yeah.
a date set by.
Or, yeah, an effective date set by the ordinance, so, yeah. Well, that's an important distinction, really. Okay, do we need to kick non-conforming around anymore?
I think we need to change our land use to closer match the shoreline zone. I mean, that's the-
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that, but,
Yeah.
but as of today, Dan's gotta work with what we got, so.
Well, let's look at, because they're very simplistic provisions in here right now. Let's just look at them real quick if we can.
Okay,
So
I'd
that's
like
page 3, section 3.
you wanna lead it?
Yep, so first we deal with, and this also just could be way better organized. It kind of lumps these concepts together a little bit with the lot structures and uses, so kind of lends to that confusion. But so non-conforming lot, if it existed before the relevant piece of the ordinance, it can be built upon, and it's not just built upon with the residence, built upon for any purpose that's allowed under in the district, even though the lot itself is non-conforming. It can't, this is what John was just getting at, it can't be divided in a way that makes it below the requirements of the ordinance. And if you have two contiguous lots next to each other that are each non-conforming, they are considered to be merged. And that means, wait a second, let me make sure it does actually say this. Yeah, there are different provisions there, but if they have a structure on them already, even though they're in the same ownership, they can be sold separately. If they don't have structures on them, so they're each vacant, then that requires them to be merged so that the lot, it may well exceed the requirements. But if it has to be merged in order to meet the requirements, then they can't be sold separately once they've come into the same ownership. So I've had
So-
situations where a developer will not think and buy a couple of different pieces of land that happen to have been non-conforming. They put them all in the same LLC to develop it, thinking, oh, we'll just resell them. But you can't do that because now once they come under the same ownership, they've merged into one lot, and you can't redivide them because now you're actually creating new illegal lots. That makes sense.
It does, but I have a question. Does it have to be, you said there has to be a structure on each of them. Is that
There's a-
indeed true?
Yeah, if there's, and that's in B here, if there's a structure on each of them, then they can be sold separately. Or they can be sold together. But if
Okay.
those two lots are vacant, that's the problem.
What about where there's a structure on one?
Yeah,
Yeah, to be merged.
I would think so.
There's three different possibilities here.
Yeah, I know, I get it. Usually the law, I mean, the ordinance will cover that. Let me see.
But ours does not.
And I actually know of one that meets that exact description. There's two lots, but same ownership. There's a structure on one lot, and the one that has nothing on it is severely non-conforming.
Yeah, and the ordinance does not do a good job of addressing that situation. So I think I would lean towards saying that because the one is built but the other is vacant, that they're merged. Can't be sold separately. But it's not what the ordinance says.
And can we kick around this concept of common ownership? Because we seem to have a little bit of a disagreement amongst ourselves on that. I mean, to my way of thinking, it has to be exactly in common ownership. Jeff doesn't share that opinion. What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, so the Maine Municipal Association, conservative way to read this is it has to be in the exact same ownership. So if Jeff and Susan own parcel A, Jeff and Susan have to own parcel B. In order for them to be, same ownership. if Jeff and Susan own parcel A and Jeff owns parcel B, then they're not in the same ownership. I would tend to be a little bit less conservative about that if we were ever in the position of having to apply this. Certainly if somebody's creating a LLC or, you know, conveying it to a child or something like that in order to get around this, then I may be inclined to say, you know, it's really, everybody is the same under the veil here. So it may be a case by case basis, but the party line is it has to be the same names on the deed.
And then let someone take us to court and have that overturned on a case by case basis if they're so inclined. It sounds like that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Can we talk about change of use, which is under E?
So change of use, this is where you have one non-conforming use. So let's just use the village district. You know, you're not allowed to have commercial use. Wait, over 10,000 square feet or at all? I'm blanking.
You
Well,
can
let's
have
just,
commercial-
actually, that's an interesting scenario. So you're allowed to have it up to 10,000 square feet, right? In village. So commercial is its own line item in our table of uses. And commercial under 10,000 square feet would be permitted, over 10,000 wouldn't. So unless it falls within one of those other table items, the question would be, you know, you have Wilson Construction, let's say, over 10,000 square feet. Let's say someone else wanted to move in and use that property for other miscellaneous commercial use. That's not what Wilson is doing. I would tend to say that because they're in that same line item on the table, that use can be, you know, changed, or that it's not even really a change of use. So in theory, somebody could buy this property and keep up the same scope of use and same impact of use that Wilson has. And that would be allowed. But if they wanted to take it away from being a construction company and make it, you know, let's say a motel, they would not be able to do that because it's a change of use from one type of non-commercial use, non-conforming use, one line item on the table to now a different line item on the table. And that would not be allowed.
Can we take just a simpler, cleaner example of just, okay, we have a, I'm trying to think of it. Let's go to R2. We have a junkyard, which is a non-conforming use in R2, correct? Correct. Somebody wants to change that junkyard to a gravel pit, which is, let's say it is, I don't know if it is or it isn't, or in R2, that is not allowed, assuming they're both non-conforming.
Correct.
My example.
Yep.
Or if someone has, what about a lot that is in the village that is used strictly for a retail business, or let's say a public business. Let's take the Gilpin Butler School, for example. It was a school and now it's a community center. We decide to sell that. Someone couldn't use that exclusively as a medical office building. Again, assuming it's not allowed. I'm just pulling these examples out of the air, but.
Yeah, that one's a little different because it could have been allowed with planning board approval.
Well, again, my example assumes it's not, but.
Yeah.
But, so I just want to be clear that, you know, if just because it's being used for a commercial purpose doesn't mean that you can put any commercial purpose in there. It's kind of my point. Depending on where it falls on the.
Depending on where it falls on the chart. That's why I was using that example of the over 10,000 square feet, because it it could fall within a different line item on that table, and now it's not allowed. So my hotel example. But if it's within the same line item, then it isn't considered a change of use in the first place. So this is
Right.
another potential area of improvement, would be if you want to be more specific about various types of commercial uses, to expand that a little bit. Because
Well, that's-
not all commercial uses, of course, are created equal, and some have way more impact than others.
Well, that's kind of where I was going, because I know we're gonna move to the table of use, but to me, there are some items on the table of use that are sort of, how do I put it? An office building is a commercial use, but it's also specifically allowed or not allowed, and so, I think it's a little confusing that some are subsets of larger sets, to look at it from a kind of math point of view. But anyway.
No,
Are we
I don't
ready to-
know. I think Jeff has been the key in getting these two ordinances to be similar, but I don't know how similar the table of uses are. Has that been looked at?
There are items in the shoreland that are not in the land use, but everything in the land use is in the shoreland.
But the
That's what I
shoreline is
was
much,
assuming.
Yes.
the shoreline is much more specific. And I
Yep.
think it causes confusion when we have two different table of uses personally, but
Yeah, and again, that's a super easy amendment to at least have those line items. But then you've got to look back at the comprehensive plan, make sure that, if you're adding something and banning it in a certain district, that you're not sort of going against what the comp plan said about that district.
so, on abandonment, that only, in our ordinance, only applies to use, correct? That's how I read it.
Yes, yep, absolutely. So a non-conforming structure could be sitting there for decades and decades, rotting into the earth. And as long as that footprint of the structure is there, it could be rebuilt or moved, or, rebuilt and expanded, all within the constraints of the ordinance. But if a non-conforming use, so, the over 10,000 square feet in village, for instance, were disbanded for, I've got to get back up there.
18 months, but
Yeah, then it can't be restarted.
do we want to move to the table of use, or we'd rather talk about dimensional first?
I think we could talk about dimensional and non-conforming structures forever. So, I think the thing to say about it is non-conforming structures are a total minefield, and tread very lightly in authorizing anything to be done with a structure that doesn't meet the setbacks or lot coverage or whatever it is, but that we'd want to look at the ordinance together. All right, so I guess we were sort of already talking about the table, but what specifically did you want to touch on?
I kind of wanted to walk right down through it. Some we can do quickly. But I guess, some of these are also defined, I believe, like accessory use of structure, I think is also in the definitions. Is
Yeah,
that-
and I want to pounce right on that accessory use or structure, because I think that's one that people abuse quite a lot. And it's almost evolved to the point where if it's the second thing on a property, then it's automatically treated as accessory. But that's not at all the case when you look at the definition, which I have to get to.
Yeah.
So the
it's,
definition is a use or structure which is incidental and subordinate to the principal use or structure. Accessory uses, when aggregated, shall not subordinate the principal use of the lot. A deck or similar extension of the principal structure or garage is considered part of the principal structure. So the key here, though, is it's incidental and subordinate to the principal use or structure. So just because you have a 3,000 square foot house on a lot, and you're building a 1,000 square foot house on a lot that is going to be rented out or used separately, that use is not accessory, and that structure is not accessory. Even though it's smaller, it is its own separate thing. It's not dependent on that principal structure. It's not, it's its own separate little pillar on that property. People are using it in all the same ways as the main home because it's being used by a separate family. So for instance, I do not consider a situation where there's a main house on a lot and then the people have a guest cottage that they're Airbnb-ing. I don't consider that to be an accessory use because the use actually isn't incidental or subordinate. In fact, in a lot of ways, more impactful, right? So, keep an eye out for that sort of a thing. Again, just because it's smaller doesn't mean that it's subordinate. Now take that situation and you've got the 3,000 square foot house and you're building a 1,000 square foot house. And the people are saying, this is for my in-laws, it's for, use as office space when we need it and additional guest space from time to time. That absolutely is incidental and subordinate as far as I'm concerned. So you could take the same structure and the use that's being made of it totally changes it from being a principal structure to an accessory structure.
The trouble with that is that relies on someone's intention at a given point in time, which can change over the years, particularly if a new owner comes in. Something is built as an in-law apartment, they use it as that for 10 years, they die, move away, someone else owns it, and all of a sudden they got an Airbnb, and now you're back to your original definition. Very tough to enforce.
Well, who enforces that they don't originally use it as an Airbnb?
Right. Well, technically the code officer, but it's
Right.
difficult.
But how do you've got
Yeah.
somebody has to file Airbnb and see
Yeah.
what's going on, and that's time consuming.
I would almost advocate for removing accessory use or structure from the table. Because it's not its own type of use. Really, it's about, let's say, let me see if I can find a good example. Must be something that's not allowed. You guys allow too many things. Okay, I guess a campground. Let's say you have, I don't know, somebody who has 50 acres and they have a whole family compound there, a house, another couple of guest cottages, all sorts of stuff. And then they're going to also create a little campground with, 5 spots down by the water. Would they try to say, oh, well, that's an accessory use? Because it's really, it's only 5 campsites and we've got this whole thing going on the rest of the property. And this is only a 2-acre component of it. I would rather not look to this and say, oh, well, it's an accessory use, maybe it's allowed. I would rather say, well, what is it? What is this use? It's a campground, and campgrounds aren't allowed in that district.
Yeah, and it's interesting, I don't see accessory use at a quick glance in the shoreline zoning ordinance table of use. It may be there, but I don't see it, looking at it quickly.
Look at the bottom of the table. It might say use is accessory or structure is accessory.
No, it says use is similar to requiring a CEO or use is similar to allowed uses, but I don't want to spend a lot of time, but I don't see it quick.
16, line 16.
Yeah. Well, that's structures.
It's structures, exactly. It's the use piece that really could screw you up.
Structures allowed uses.
I think the thing that you could take it out, but just in general, one thing I like to target when I look at these rewrites is something, and for home occupations too, saying, yeah, it might be a home occupation or it might be an accessory use, but it also independently has to be allowed in that district.
That's interesting. Okay, so then the next thing is additions in excess of 100 square feet, which implies that additions in less than 100 square feet don't need a permit. And there used to be structures less than 100 square feet didn't need a permit, if I recall, a long time ago. Yeah, so additions, but I'm just gonna walk down. If anybody wants to chime in or got any thoughts or questions about them. Agricultural land management, it's allowed everywhere, doesn't need a permit. Bed and breakfast, allowed everywhere, but it requires planning board. Campgrounds are allowed in 2 zones. Although we've had a request to have the eliminate them in R2.
The request is actually not to eliminate from R2, it's to eliminate them from one area.
And I don't know how you do that.
No.
I thought it was R2, but
Half the area that they want to eliminate is an R2 area.
Yeah.
But they were specific about where they wanted.
right. But then they also said at the end of it, there's plenty of room in R1. So I mean, I'm not sure they were clear on what they were asking, but campgrounds, campsites, I think we've kicked that around. Cemeteries don't need a permit. Churches are CEO. Which is, I find that interesting, because I mean, a church can be a huge, and that's what it is in the shoreline too, though. I mean, that can have a huge impact, traffic. Okay, so here's the commercial, 10,000 square feet and greater than 10,000 square feet. But yet, what confuses me about this is we then go on and list several commercial activities, like campgrounds and bed and breakfasts and junkyards and motels and professional offices, which all are commercial uses. So would it be more appropriate? So I guess I get a little confused. Does that mean that a professional office, let's say it was allowed, could be more than 10,000 square feet? So I just wonder if it should be commercial, not otherwise enumerated or something.
Unfortunately, that's how it's interpreted.
Well, I don't know if that's unfortunate, but
Well, no, because the reality is that there are probably some commercial uses that we should be delineated that we haven't. That, in my opinion.
okay.
So here's how I would deal with that is, you often see a lot of footnotes in tables of uses, and there are in the shoreland zone. What I would do is, again, try to more specifically enumerate all these types of uses. And then for anything that is commercial use, you'd have a footnote, and the footnote would drop down and say, you know, under 10,000 square feet.
But, and that's fine, but for Dan's purposes now, do you think it's fair to say that he needs to interpret that as commercial uses that are not otherwise listed here?
Yeah, so specific, I'd say controls over the general. So if a motel, for instance, is allowed, I think it's obvious that a motel is going to be more than 10,000 square feet. So I think the intention there was if it's 10,000, well, actually, I think if we go through most of these, things that were likely to be more than 10,000 square feet are also not allowed in this district.
Well,
Two,
except the one you just used is allowed in every district, the motel.
motel is, okay, well, great, good example then. So it's a
Right, okay.
motel, it's a bed and breakfast or whatever it is, or no, it's an inn. Then I would look to that, and if it is allowed with planning board approval, I think even if it's more than 10,000 square feet, it's allowed in that district with planning board approval.
So, yeah, I mean, I would agree, that's currently the way it reads, but
Gets a little trickier though, when you look at something like professional office. You know, if it were, why did we specifically enumerate that? I guess probably in this case, because we thought that professional offices by their nature are not that objectionable. So we want to allow them with planning board approval in every district. Regardless of their size, we're not that concerned.
well, it's also allowed in the shoreline zone.
Mhm.
Well, no, it's not allowed in every zone, but it's allowed in, it's not allowed in every zone, the shoreline zone, but it is allowed.
But there's definitely ambiguity here, like, could you have a restaurant that's more than 10,000 square feet, for instance?
You're saying yes, that's the way you read it now.
That's the way I would read it. I mean, we're gonna interpret it in the way that is, you know, sort of more in the direction of property rights. Unless we have some real good argument. I don't know that we do, because it seems like there was an intent to break these out in particular and say that they were allowed regardless of their size.
Okay, so for Dan's purposes now, and the planning board really, but, you're saying that if someone files an application for a structure that's more than 10,000 feet, say for a hotel or some other allowed use of structure in the village, for example, then that's allowed currently. That would be your opinion.
Right, I think the way, probably just for simplicity's sake, I would read that commercial line as like miscellaneous commercial, meaning, you know, not otherwise listed.
And in fact, that's how it was originally put in here. It was to capture the miscellaneous commercial activities that were going on that we didn't already have captured. Tradesman shops that we used to allow.
Right.
And so there were a lot of commercial activities going on that we just didn't have a view of. So the commercial was put in there specifically to look for that as a miscellaneous group.
On the other hand, though, and I don't want to keep coming back to a particular example, but I think there have been some things that have come in under that commercial use, or are currently working with that because they're not defined and they're high impact. And Wilson's is an example. I mean, and I think there could be others. I mean, not that I'm picking on that. Don't get me wrong, but
No,
so
I agree.
It's not a little incidental tradesman shop that, you know, that with 2 cars going in and out a day or something. You know, so.
Well, the problem is that our tradesman shop definition was pretty broad. And it's, for example, that's how Wilson started. He was a tradesman shop.
Yeah.
And did not require a permit when he first started. So doing the commercial line prompted him, amongst other people, to put in a permit for commercial operation. But I think there are a lot of things under miscellaneous that should be detailed better, especially things that will have an impact.
Yeah, and I also think, I agree with Chris, and we should try to bump these together as much as possible. And I'm referring to the shoreline.
Right.
So, we don't want to turn this whole meeting into what we should do with the ordinance. We want to focus on what we're here for, which is to try to help Dan out with what he's got currently. So, any other, as we go down through here, that, I do see, just as a footnote, that motels are not allowed. On Spruce Head Island. And I assume that's water related.
Yes.
Okay, anything else we need to talk about here? Anybody?
Just when you're looking at the uses similar to allowed uses and similar to uses requiring a permit, when I think of similar to, I think not only of the kind of type of business, but of the impacts of it. So if it's, if you could make the case that, yeah, it's kind of similar to something on the table, but it's way more impactful because of what it is, then I'm okay with making the distinction there. But it's not actually similar.
Yeah, and those two lines, similar uses,
They're in the show.
yes, and they were added the last update to this document to the land use to mirror the shoreline. And I debated about it a long time, whether I thought we should put that in there.
I'll give you an example maybe that will resonate. So we don't, I think, have wind turbine anywhere on this list, but we do have solar facilities. So let's say you had a, wind turbine that could produce 1 megawatt. You could look at this and say, oh, well, that's kind of like, it's renewable energy. It's kind of like a solar energy system of the same megawattage, but it also definitely isn't. It's very different in terms of what it looks like, sounds like, et cetera. So you wouldn't classify it as similar there, even though you can make some connections. And the end result would be that it's not allowed because it's not specifically listed on the permit. I mean, on the table.
Right, and I can say the ordinance review committee talked a lot about towers. And it was intentionally not, we intentionally did not include that in here because I don't think we're ready to deal with wind turbine towers.
Well, it also doesn't have cell towers, does it?
Except that that's already regulated. The cell towers are regulated.
Yeah, cell towers and ham radio towers and such have their own huge protections under the federal law. So it's an area that's hard to touch even if we wanted to.
So, and so in other words, you're saying that it's exempt from our 35-foot maximum height requirement?
They are.
Is that,
It is,
yeah.
Essentially what they get is they get is sort of like a reasonable accommodation analysis where you've got to find a place in town where they go. If they come to you and say, hey, we want to put up a tower, you got to find a place for them. Even if your ordinance doesn't otherwise allow it.
We also don't require demolition permits. Am I correct?
no.
And yet you were, you were processing one, I just happened, you were talking about it. And, so I bring that up as a question.
We don't require, that wouldn't be a use, but it could be a.
It's on our fee schedule. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not required in here.
Yeah.
Is it required in the shoreline? Maybe that was in the shoreline, I don't know.
Because again, that's not a use, that's a.
No, but but you certainly can require demolition permits. I mean,
Right.
People do that all
But
the
you
time.
don't need to have, it doesn't have to need to be in here.
So, but what, just because it's on our fee schedule, to me, doesn't give us the authority to require one, though, if it's not in the ordinance. I mean, we set the fee schedule.
Yeah.
Town meeting sets the ordinance. I don't know, you got any thoughts on that? I don't want to open a hornet's nest, but I don't think anyone's ever gotten
No,
one before.
Yeah, I agree with that. I can't say with any certainty that there's nothing in the ordinance and land use ordinance that covers it. But I haven't seen it saying, thou shalt get a permit for demo. I'm
How would they?
not even sure there is under the shoreline zoning. Excavation, of course, needs one.
Yeah, I don't think there is in the shoreline zoning either,
No, there-
but it's just odd that we have it on our fee schedule. And Dan actually issued one.
I've thrown out 5 or 6 of them so far.
Yes, yeah, I think we can set those kinds of permit fees, those kind of fees scheduled without them. That doesn't affect the land use.
Yeah.
ordinance.
Yeah, I would.
Yeah, but you
disagree
can't
with
by a fee schedule require them to get a permit, is the point.
that. Yeah, if they won't volunteer to go on, then. Food for thought.
Well, that goes along with one of our other big gaps, and that is site plan. We don't have any regulation for site plans. And that's where you can logically put demolition.
Well, someone could just come in and want to demolish a building and not do anything else. But, I mean, Sue asked a question, why would you need a demolition permit? I mean, to me, in urban areas, I can see why, because, you might be demolishing between 2 buildings with
Right.
common walls, but, I mean, is it something in a small town like this that we want to provide a disincentive to people demolishing junky buildings?
Or unless you just want them to do that, because then you know that they may possibly be putting something else up. And that would
That's where I
allow-
go with this, Sue.
that would
Is
allow
then at
you
least
to-
we know.
Yeah,
With the-
or it could be that you want to make sure that if it's known to be filled with asbestos or something, that,
That's
that,
properly.
hey, that was an
Yeah.
asbestos factory for you, I don't know, but,
Well, and it completes the cycle with the appraisal portion.
it does, it takes the building off the property card, yeah, for the appraiser to take it off, but I guess my thought is it should be in the ordinance, but at this point, I'm not sure that it is. But, okay. While we're talking about the table of uses, on the application form, and I think this is related to the table of uses, and I think I struggle with this concept. It asks, and I brought this up before, it asks for the applicant to describe in detail the work you will be doing under this permit. But nowhere on the form does it either have the CEO or the planning board or whoever, or the applicant check off the corresponding, right in the corresponding table of use requirement. And I personally think we should. I mean, I think we should try to get them to do that.
For the planning board, it would be part of their finding of fact. It's a required step that they have to take.
But I mean, there's nothing that ties the application to the table of use, and I find that as kind of a disconnect. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that if it's gonna be on there, it should be staff use only and the code enforcement officer fills that out. But,
Yeah,
well, if people are left to their own devices, they'll choose the wrong thing.
agree with that. I agree with that. But just in other places I've worked, it seems to me, I recall the application,
You do it,
Which is-
demolition on them too.
yeah, and it has demolition on it. Good one.
Not to interrupt you, but.
Type of improvement, but it's not required by the ordinance.
Well, I mean, that's an addendum to an appendix to to the ordinance, so.
but it's not approved like the map. This says, the ordinance says the CEO can create the form.
Right.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean the CEO could change this and say that churches aren't allowed anywhere in town.
Right.
I mean, so, to use an extreme example. But anyways, I just feel that it should tie, and that's great, that's interesting, but it should tie. We should specify what the use is on the application. Of course, someone should make that formal determination in which category it falls.
And there's a major reason that's helpful is that 30 years down the line, when somebody's trying to pull a permit and see what was allowed before the ordinance changed, there's something that's distinctly saying what it was.
And I think the other thing it should do is the applicable ordinance, if it's shoreline zone versus land use, that should be, so I think.
Well, that's not on here.
No, it was a spot there, yes. Or that's actually on the permit itself. that-
On the permit itself.
Yeah, that land use, shoreland, village, whatever, it is on there.
But I do think that's a step the CEO should take.
Yeah, well,
It's a shoreland zone, and it's for this particular use.
and I also think it should have a box that says, in the floodplain, yes, no. Because I think that's a reminder that, that someone's made a determination or. Okay, have we kicked this around enough?
I'm good.
I feel like we talked quite a bit about the shoreline zoning on it, so I'm not sure we need to walk down through it, unless other people feel we need to.
It is a lot easier for the CEO to work with the shoreline than it is the land use. I mean, it's more specific, it's more detailed.
Well, plus you can call the people from the state and.
Right, and 90% of it is state mandated. So.
Yeah. Anything else at all we want to cover on this end?
So, I mean, what you're talking about is, in that area.
Right.
And with, I can determine, a right in what particular use is or.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, and this is the permit itself, but I'm thinking that, but yeah, that's good. Okay. It just feels like we got a lot of little inconsistencies that would make things a lot easier if we kind of tied them up and use the exact same words here, not similar words, but do we need Kristen for anything else? Anything you want?
Fire truck.
Huh?
Fire
I
truck.
meant, I know. I meant here, I mean, this is particularly for your benefit, so anything else you want to cover, or?
I think I'm good.
Okay.
I think we've covered a bit.
We've got a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, we do want to talk to you about the matter that you talked to me about. We don't need Kristen for that, and we have someone coming on at 5. Kristen, you're gonna leave at 5, so why don't we switch to the fire trucks? Can you hang around for a few minutes, and then we can talk with you, and then we can hopefully talk with Brian and the guy at 5 o'clock from the fire truck company. That work for everybody? So we're probably gonna need 10 minutes or so. You're welcome to stay, or you can go work on your own. I'll call you.
I'll give you guys 10 minutes.
Well, 10 or 15, whatever. Yep. We'll come. We are meeting actually with the fire truck representative, fire truck salesman representative who was brought to us the lease purchase, even though that's not his game, so to speak. It's the people they typically bring to different towns. We actually haven't even made, in my mind, we haven't made a decision one way or another whether we're gonna go with a lease purchase or traditional borrowing. But we did ask you to take a look at the lease purchase agreement, boilerplate, if you will. I know I have a few questions on it, and we also need to talk about whether we want to make a deposit of some sort, which is supposedly protected by a performance bond, and we get a discount if we do that. And I think that's it for now. I will say that I did ask Terry to get a rate from the bank that we use and how much we could borrow without a bond counsel opinion, and was it, it was more than enough.
It was 3.57.
I don't, no, I'm not talking about the rate, I'm talking how much we could borrow without a bond counsel opinion. Was it- what was it?
100,000 before about bond council.
Oh, it was more than that.
I thought it was like a
I
lot
don't
more than
remember. I
that.
can go get my book.
Yeah, you told me a lot more than that,
I thought
because it was enough to cover it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let me look at my emails.
Huh? Yeah. So we got a lot of questions in play here. I guess, I'm not quite sure where to start. I guess the first decision we need to make is, do we want to move ahead with a lease purchase that we can execute either now or later? Or do we want to wait and borrow later? I don't think we can borrow now, nor do I think we should. Do we want to make some sort of deposit? And I guess that those are the major questions.
It was $1 million or greater.
That's what I thought. So we can borrow $1 million from our bank, avoiding the cost of a bond counsel opinion. I quickly looked at, just jumping to the discount, I quickly looked at if we paid a 50% discount, what that would save us, is $12,500. And I took 50% of that and multiplied it times 3%, and what we're getting now currently in the reserve fund is almost 4%, and that's not without compounding it. And the 3% was about 12,000. So I'm not sure we're saving any money by the discount. I mean, it struck me that they're probably going to be similar.
They did the same calculation.
Yeah, they did the same calculation, right? The other advantage is if we're short of cash or something as well, going along over the next year and a half, we have something we could borrow from. So I'm not convinced that the discount, even though it appears attractive, when you sort of net out, now, because all of this depends on what interest rates are, but
Right.
right. So I'm not necessarily in favor of the discount, personally, for the reasons I just stated. So any other thoughts on the discount?
I agree on the discount. I'd already, in my mind, yeah.
Yeah, if it's not gonna really save you any money in the long run, why do it?
Well, the only thing is that it could, if the interest rates fell dramatically, we would, we'd be locked into the, say, the 12,500, we'd have that in hand. But I don't really see that happening in the next year or so. I don't know, you have any thoughts at all on that, Kristen? Not that you need to have any, but.
No, I mean, like I said in my email, it's a bargaining opportunity, I think. To the extent bargaining is possible here.
Yeah.
But it seemed, the terms in themselves are not that great. And it's not that big of a discount given the value of the money that you're contributing to it.
And that was just for a year that I did it on, and it's gonna be more than a year.
Right.
So I think we're far better off, again, unless there's a total collapse of the interest rate. So is that issue settled? Okay. Then I guess the other big question is, do we want a lease purchase or just borrow? I think the advantage to a lease purchase is we can lock into a rate right now which is actually higher than we could borrow right now, right, by about a percentage point.
Yeah,
But we can't lock into borrowing from the bank right now, as I understand it. Is that correct? We'd have to wait until it's more, we're talking a year and a half out here or something like that, 500 days. So I guess, the question is, do we want to lock in? And then they put the money in an escrow account under the terms of this lease agreement. And I guess I'm not sure how safe that is, or is there a risk there? Did you think about that at all, Kristen, when you looked at that section of it, or?
Yeah, I mean, there's a risk, of course, that the financing company goes belly up and you can't get that money that's there with your name on it in the escrow account. I think it's a low risk. They're not giving you any performance bond or anything there on that end, but presumably it's in an FDIC insured account. You're able to access the money if need be. I don't think that's super risky. So it's really more about the time value of the money and whether you think the rate lock is more important than anything.
Well, and I guess the other question I have for the people that come further is, if we do the lease purchase, do we have to do it now? I'm not sure that we do. We could do it and if we're not gonna do the discount or 100% discount, what's the reason to even do it now? I mean, why couldn't we just wait and borrow, either lease purchase or borrow from the bank at the time we need money? Obviously, the big answer is we can't lock in the interest rate.
Right.
But
But do they require you to sign on to one way or another to actually start the production of the truck?
well, I think the production of the truck is started.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe. I mean,
Think
we
we
placed the order for the truck,
Right.
whether it's actually started or not. We're committed to it. We have a contract with E1. I mean, not to say we couldn't get out of it, with some damage penalty payment or something, but I don't know. I guess so that's a question we can ask them. And I don't know. I mean, if we think that in a year and a half from now, interest rates are likely to be 10%, we're gonna kick ourselves maybe for not locking in, but, so. I guess that's a big question. And then I had some, on the lease purchase, I had some nitpicky things. I didn't see anything where it said that we could prepay without a penalty. Although the guy told us that, but I couldn't find it. And of course, we don't have the payment schedule, so I don't know what that looks like. It wasn't even a draft of it. We have to, any litigation has to be done in New York.
That's the one I did not.
If there's any issues there. The other thing is, it says that the governing body has provided you the authority, and it says the governing body is defined in this document, and I couldn't find a definition of the governing body. And I don't know whether that means town meeting. To me, it would. Or does it mean the select board? Those were the kind of the things that I saw from a more technical point of view.
I do think that town meeting authorizes to.
Well, I guess, Yeah, I guess-
That warrant article listed this as one of the options that we could do at our discretion.
and I guess, Chris, I lean to you on that. Do you? I sent you the warrant article, I believe.
Yeah, sorry, and I couldn't hear that little exchange.
Jeff felt that the warrant article, if the governing body is indeed town meeting, he felt that the town meeting, because they passed that warrant article, excuse me, gave us the authority, because in a couple of places it says, I, the undersigned, hereby certify that I am duly qualified to represent the lessee and have been given the authority by the governing body to sign this certificate of
Yeah, it's town meeting. I think that's pretty clear.
All right, but, so that's question number one. I agree with you. Question number two is, was that article broad enough to give us the authority that's requested in this draft document? Because there's several places where it refers to the governing body.
Yeah, I think it does.
Okay,
But what about the amounts? That was the part that I was concerned about, because the bond note or lease purchase agreement authority was aggregate amount of debt principal not to exceed 438,000.
yeah,
As long as we could stay within that and fund the rest through
Yeah,
cash
we-
contribution and capital account.
we should. I mean, that assumes that the next two budgets will include a contribution similar to what the contribution was made this year to the reserve funds. So that's why you add up, when you add up what we have in hand and what we borrow, it doesn't add up to the 835, because we're assuming there's gonna be two more reserve contributions of about 65,000 each, or 67, or whatever it is.
Yeah, so
Um,
and maybe this is a question for the dealer, but I guess the question would be, can you lease purchase finance less than the full purchase price of the truck? Less down payment. I mean, can we have essentially a balloon cash payment that we have to make at the time delivery is taken, and the lease purchase amount comes out of escrow to fund whatever amount that is?
We can ask that question. I just assumed that was the case. That's the way I've always dealt with the lease purchases, is like when I was working buying buses and stuff, it was always what you had on hand less, the cost of the bus less what you had on hand is what you lease purchased. But we can ask that question. I just assumed that.
I did too.
But I guess we shouldn't assume anything.
Some of the stuff that you picked up on from the lease purchase, I also picked up on just on a quick scan. I didn't do a full red line on this because I didn't know whether you're going to go ahead with it. I would say probably better to make a decision as to whether you like that option, and then we would look at the document carefully and pick everything out.
So did you pick out any other kind of critical ones that were missing that you thought? or-
No, not that you didn't just already enumerate there.
All right, do we need Kristen anymore?
It doesn't prohibit prepayment, but it also doesn't specifically allow it.
Right. And typically, my experience has been in the past, it's specifically allowed in language in there. And I don't want to get in a situation where somebody dumps $100,000 on us in their will to pay off this loan that we can't do it. Not that I'm anticipating that, but.
I mean, what it says is, once you've made all your quote rental payments, they transfer title.
I saw that.
But does that mean to them that you have to make, however many enumerated rental payments before they'll transfer title in that way?
It actually kind of says that you got to make the payments in accordance with the schedule. Now,
Exactly.
obviously, they're probably thinking that you can't be late.
But we did ask him specifically that question.
I don't remember, I know, but him saying it and then reinterpreting
I
it.
agree 100%.
There's a lot of saying. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I'm kind of leaning towards financing it through the bank when the time comes.
Yeah. See, I'm pessimistic about where the interest rates are going to go.
Yeah.
And so my gut is to lock in now, because I think a year from now, a year and a half from now, interest rates are going to be. I mean, feds are not shy at all about jacking it up every couple of weeks. So.
And that's the big question. Yeah. So,
Gamble
It
either
sounds like
way.
you're gonna be that.
Yeah, I do think it's a gamble.
Oh, it is, but that's why we sit here, we gotta make these
I
decisions.
mean, the rates are pretty low now, lower than they have been.
Yeah.
So what's the likelihood that they're gonna stay that low? Probably not great.
I don't know, something about, I mean, even, Chris. Well. If we escrow the money though, well, we would have made some payments. Probably, if they, I come back to, you said it's always at risk, if they went belly up, it might be, I mean, we could spend money, we might eventually get it, but we might spend money getting it, you know what I mean? In New York. But all of we would have at risk, I suppose, is what we actually had paid to them. I mean, if they funded the escrow account with their money, that's no skin off our nose, so to speak. I mean,
Yeah, but I didn't read it, that's okay.
what
It's
do you
gonna be
mean?
what we put in.
No, I thought they were gonna fund the entire amount, that they were gonna put into escrow account. Isn't that how you read it? The entire amount that we
Yeah,
bought?
they process the loan, essentially, it's a loan still. They fund it, and then they hold it there in escrow until the truck is ready, at which point they pay it over and your rental payments start.
Well,
So
I
that's
thought
all done on the basis of the town's credit. And then at that point, if there's no purchase for whatever reason, presumably that money goes back to the bank and the agreement gets terminated.
I thought the rental payment started, which my impression was, that, and again, we don't have the rental payment schedule, but my impression was the first one would be due a year from now. Or a year from when we closed on the lease agreement. So we would have actually sent them a payment. And that's another decision we haven't made, is we want to go 6 years, 7 years, 8 years. So they would have a seventh of what we borrowed. And that, to me, that's what would be at risk. But again, we don't have a payment schedule, even a draft, so.
Well, I mean, it says after the document, this is on their summary. I would have to look more carefully at the lease itself, but on their summary, it says, after the documents are signed and the vendor is funded, you will be invoiced in accordance with the payment schedule included with the documents when a payment is due. So the way I read that was, you're not going to get invoiced until the truck has been delivered, which is when the payment gets funded.
Okay, I didn't read it that way. I read that we were gonna get billed, invoiced a year from when we closed. And that has been my experience in the past, but, okay.
Did you get a sample schedule?
No, that's the problem.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess that's something that could be clarified.
Yeah, I have that on the list to ask them. But.
Okay.
Yeah, because if that is the case, my point is, if we make a payment, say it's 60,000, I'm just pulling that out of the air, and something happens, that 60,000 is potentially at risk.
Yes.
But that's the only thing at risk, because the rest of it is their money, right?
Correct.
Unless, and I didn't hear anything about them requiring that we had to put our money in the escrow, but no, I do.
There you go.
Okay, are we good with Kristen?
Thank you.
Kristen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Let
And-
me know if you end up going with the lease purchase and we'll tear it apart.
But don't do anything for now until we make that decision. And you're gonna continue to work with Dan to try to move some of these enforcements along?
Yeah, I mean, I normally I'm in the reactive kind of role. If you want me to be in the proactive role on a couple matters, I think that would be for the select board to sort of prioritize and give me authority to kind of drive the process, so.
I think on the Buttermilk Lane property.
Yeah, my inclination is we need, Terry's shaking her head, we need a little proactivity, hopefully to maybe kickstart some things.
I think, maybe, so you can't do it in executive session unless I'm there, but you know, if there are 3 targeted things we need to take action on, I need to know what those 3 things are, where they are, whether a notice of violation has been issued or verbal or whatever, and get a summary. I mean, maybe Dan can do that as a report to the select board about where things stand on a few things, and then share that with me, and then I would take it from there and help him drive that process.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Yeah,
Thank
we
you.
got you out early.
It's great.
Do we have time? Dan wants to, the executive session, Dan wants to chat with us about his duties and
He has some,
schedules. And so I told him we chat with him in executive session for personnel matter.
so these are the permits and certification hours, permits in the last couple of years. Then on the back page is the hours that he's worked since he started. They, at first, Bill didn't have them broken down, but then over July and August, I put the hours for CEO and LPI.
Okay,
And these ones are, he can start breaking them down for you.
so can I have a motion to go into executive session to, under whatever it is, to discuss a personnel matter? So we'll second.
I'll second that.
Further discussion, we'll grab Dan in a minute. All those in favor?